Hey everyone, welcome to the first in a series of videos I decided to make where my main goal is to compare where the video game industry used to be to where it currently sits now from an old school gamer's perspective. Now, I did already slightly touch upon this in the very first video I ever posted on this channel, but after looking back at it, today I want to talk about the game industry and my perspective from somebody who grew up in the 80s and 90s. I want to welcome everyone to my first video and enjoy the content. Yeah, I have gotten a bit better at this since then. At least I would like to think I have. Now, my original idea was to make this a single long video, but for my sanity and possibly yours, I decided to break this up into parts to make it easier on both of us. For those who have already watched my previous videos, this is going to be very different from what I normally do because I wanted to challenge myself to see if I can make something with a bit more substance. Now, when I say old school gamers perspective, I mean way back. I'm talking back in the days of the 8-bit NES. I'm sure some of you watching this may have childhood memories from the PlayStation 2 and Xbox days, or maybe your earliest memories are the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. But me, I'm that old. Some of you may know of these things from videos or internet articles, but I was there and I lived it.
I was there 3,000 years ago.
To understand the state of the video games industry today and why you see a lot of complaining online, justifiably so, I want to take you back to not really where it all started, but where it actually started to take shape and become mainstream. Now, I could talk about the video game crash of 1983, but to be honest, I'm not going to go into that because there's plenty of information out there. And plus, during that time, I would have been 3 years old, and video games were not heavy on my mind. Yet. Me and my friends at the time, we were too busy playing outside and riding bikes. If we were not doing that, then we were playing with He-Man, G.I. Joe, and later Transformers toys. Oh, and we can't forget Thundercats. For me, it all started in the summer of 1987. That is where my journey into 8-bit began. Now, as we all know, the NES came out in 1985. I remember seeing commercials for it as a kid, but my mind was still on other things. I remember being with my dad one afternoon. He was hanging out with some buddies of his at a cafe, and I was sitting bored after eating my cheeseburger. I did notice a Pac-Man arcade. My dad, noticing this, he did slip me a few corners and said, go give it a try. I played maybe a couple of rounds, and by that time he was ready to go, and I really did not think much about it after that. Sure, it was a fun time waster, but I can't say it made a huge impression on me, at least not yet. So while technically that is my first experience ever with a video game, it was not until that summer I mentioned that everything changed. So to set the stage a little, during the time my parents worked, we had a lady that lived about 4 houses down that ran a little small daycare out of her house. Now, when I say small, I mean there was like maybe 2 to 3 of us kids there at a time. My parents knew her very well, and she did not charge them much to watch me at all. Now, back in the 80s, most kids my age were what we call latchkey kids, which meant they would come home and they already had a key to get into the house and had to fend for themselves until their parents got home. Now, in my case, it is not that I needed to be watched, I chose to go over there. Her son was considerably older than me, but my 7-year-old brain thought he was the coolest dude ever. Plus, there was a girl that would come over that I liked. Well, one summer morning, it was a normal day. I walked down the street after my parents left for the day. And what is the first thing I see? Her son sitting on the floor in the living room playing this game. I had to take a pause. I stared at the screen, watching this little guy in green walk around, stabbing everything on the screen with a sword, and then I finally asked, "Is that the Nintendo?" I was mesmerized. I sat down next to him and just watched him play this game for hours. Finally, he looks at me and goes, "You could play 2 players, want to see?" 7-year-old me is here like, yeah. So he turns off the NES and takes the game out with all of its gold glory. And I thought, That was the coolest thing I have ever seen. And he puts in this gray cartridge, and at first I was like, oh, that one must not be as good. Trust me, I was wrong about that, because what did he put in? This. This was the best thing I have ever seen. There were bullets flying everywhere, exploding bridges, a spread gun. The obstacle was my mom. The usual phrase would be, oh, why do we need that? Or can we really afford it? Which, newsflash, we could. My dad loved movies. Every time a new movie would come out on Betamax, he had to get it. Yes, he was Team Betamax at the time. I remember days would go by, I would go play the Nintendo at the other house while asking them every day for one. Now, let's fast forward to Christmas the same year. In my family, if you wanted what they considered a big gift, then you had to accept the fact you were only getting that one big gift. Now, I'm sure at this point in my story, you can imagine what my Christmas list looked like. It only had one item. I remember weeks going by and I had yet to see one present with my name on it. I was thinking, okay, this is it. They are going to do it. Christmas morning comes. By this point, it's like 6:30 in the morning. I ran to the tree to see what Santa brought me. Fun little fact, growing up, I knew Santa was not real, but it was fun to pretend. I look under the tree and see a tiny box. I was like, no way this is my big gift. This can't be an NES. My heart sunk to the lowest pits of my chest it could go. My parents finally come out. We have breakfast. I do not say a word. My dad finally goes, you want to see what Santa brought you? I was like, sure, I guess. The present felt really light, like it barely had anything in it, which caused even more confusion. Now, my dad, he loved his Christmas shenanigans, and this time was no different. As I unwrapped the present and opened the box, it has a single folded piece of paper in it, simply read, good for 2 Nintendo games. I look up at my dad to ask, what is this? And he is standing there holding an NES unopened. Needless to say, that was the best Christmas to date. I did not hesitate. I took that box and I was like a blur going down the hallway to my room. Now, this is where I'm going to compare a little bit to then versus now. Back then, the NES came out with 2 controllers and a game, which was Super Mario Bros. Later on, they did release versions that came with a light gun and a combo game with Mario and Duck Hunt on the same cartridge. Now you get 1 controller, and maybe you will get a download code depending on the console edition you picked up. Now, remember that piece of paper I mentioned in the Christmas present? Yeah, I didn't forget about that. I remember all I could think about was, I really want Contra. And since it was 2 games, the only other reference I had was The Legend of Zelda, so I thought I had my mind made up already. That was until me and Dad took a trip to Best Buy. Now, let me start off by saying I was not prepared for what I was about to walk into. I really had no idea what other games were out at the time for the NES, and when I walked into that Best Buy and went over to the video game section, my mind was blown. I remember going through and looking at all the cover art, flipping the box over to look at the screenshots. I couldn't decide. I already had Contra in my hands, and to my dismay, The Legend of Zelda was sold out. So I'm walking through the aisles, and one game catches my eye. This little gem you may have heard of. It's called Castlevania. Now, I immediately caught on to the fact that this was made by the same guys who made Contra. Konami had a distinct design on their cover art back then. I was like, okay, if they made this game, then this one has to be good too, right? Well, as we all know, that series is a classic. I noticed my dad browsing the section too. Little did I know, he was also shopping for himself. Now, my dad was a huge sci-fi fan. He loved shows like Star Trek, and he was huge into Star Wars at the time. His eye picked up on this little game called Gradius. Now, I think it's actually Gradius, Gradius. I don't know. Some people have a different term for it, but I think the official term is Gradius. Another Konami classic. Really makes you wonder what happened to Konami over the years. At this point, I could go into all the emotions I felt playing these games, but I'm going to spare you the details because as a gamer, you already know what it's like to pick up a new game and experience it for the first time. What I would rather do is circle back a bit to the drive home after we picked these games up. I remember staring at the boxes and flipping them over and looking at the screenshots again. My dad finally said, "Oh, go ahead and open it up." So I did. Inside was this physical cartridge and a manual. I loved flipping through the manual, looking at the artwork, and reading through the controls and mechanics about the game. This brings me to my whole point in all of this. There was something magical back then when it came to gaming. For one, you could hold the game in your hand. It was physically yours. No one could take it away from you, and there were no servers that existed to shut down if the company was simply done supporting it. I remember my friends coming over and experiencing the NES for the first time. The next thing I knew, they all had one too, with their own different collection of games. We would lend each other different games so we could try them out, compare our experiences with the game, share tips and tricks, all through word of mouth before the internet. Now, of course, we all loved these characters, and I remember when Captain N, the Game Master, started airing in the morning on Saturday, I would wake up at 6:30 in the morning just to watch this show. We all used to talk about it afterwards and go, "Oh, did you see that episode?" Of course, looking back, that show was cheesy as hell, but we loved it anyway. This is when we knew gaming was more than just pixels moving on a screen. Video game characters were just as meaningful to us as characters like Optimus Prime. It was a part of our culture now. People today still love these characters and they have stood the test of time. So when you see these companies make drastic changes to these characters and wonder why people online are getting upset, this is the exact reason why. But that is the start of how video games began to influence me, starting with the 8-bit era. There's so much more I could talk about, but perhaps in another video, because we can't stop things from changing and evolving. And by the time the 90s came, now we had a whole new era, a 16-bit era, which I will cover in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this little deep dive into my past and how video games started to take an influence on me. As I said before, my goal is to show the experience of an old school gamer like me, seeing where things have started and how it has led up to today. I would say some things evolved in a good way and others, well, not so much. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you are new here and want to follow this journey with me, please subscribe. I would love to have you in my community. Until then, peace out.